Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. Thanks for coming today. If you would turn off your cell phones at this time, please. If you're not on our mailing list and would like to be on our email list, the box is over there. Just fill out a form. You have on your table, if you saw the exhibit, and if you haven't, you should probably stop after. Both a survey and a form asking questions about the exhibit. I'd really appreciate if you would fill them out before you leave. You could leave them on the table, put them in the box, whatever. Next Tuesday, the 4th, we're going to talk about Chuck Howard with one of his cousins and his case for enshrinement in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So I expect to see about 600 people here for that. He's very popular, and we all agree he should be in the Hall of Fame, so it's not going to be a debate or anything. It'll just be, look how great Chuck Howard is. He's from Warwood, like me. He was a little better at football than I am. Was. But, yeah, that'll be next week. Okay, tonight at 6, we'll screen the feature documentary Traces of the Trade, a story from the Deep North by filmmaker Katrina Brown, who is a relative of Tom DeWolf here, about the discovery that her New England ancestors were the largest slave trading family in U.S. history. So she and 9 cousins, including Tom, retraced the triangle trade and gained powerful new perspectives on the black-white divide. Tom will be here for that, for Q&A after. Hope you can make it. It's about 71 minutes long, something. 80, yeah. About 80 minutes. Okay, so Tom has come all the way from Oregon to be with us today.
Thank you.
He's originally from Southern California. He's an author, public speaker, trainer, and workshop facilitator, TomDeWolf.com. Since 2013, he has served as executive director for Coming to the Table, a nonprofit organization that provides leadership resources and a supportive environment for all who wish to acknowledge and heal wounds from racism rooted in U.S. history. And that's kind of why we're here. And the reason I brought Tom in is because I wanted a perspective, from a national perspective, to focus on our town and to give us advice based on his experiences. And Ron Scott Jr. is Director of Cultural Diversity and Community Outreach at WWVA Wheeling. And he's here because he's from Wheeling. And we're going to have a dialogue, and we needed it to be a white and black dialogue. And that's what this is all about. This is not focused on either race. This is about coming together and talking about these issues from the starting point of the speech you saw upstairs. So that's why we're here, and now we should begin the discussion by having Tom and then Ron sort of give an opening. They can say whatever I left out or just talk about the project or whatever you want, but an opening statement. So go ahead, Tom, you go first.
Okay. I really appreciate y'all being here today. I'm never sure when I'm doing a presentation or appearance or whatever, if there's going to be 6 people show up, or 600, or just what. And really appreciate you taking the time today to be here with us. And to bring me across the country, it really means a lot. And my first time to Wheeling, and it's funny, I grew up in Southern California. My dad called in sick to work the first day that the Dodgers played at the new stadium in 1962. And I still have the program from that game. And so I've been a Dodgers fan all my life. I was watching the game 2 days ago on Sunday. And the pitcher's a young guy I didn't really know. It's his first year as rookie. And anybody here know Michael Grove? I mean, he got his first major league win on Sunday, and they said he's from Wheeling, West Virginia. And I looked at my wife and I go, oh my God, I'm flying there tomorrow. And so it was the thing that I find interesting. You may think that has nothing to do with what we're here to talk about today, but what strikes me is that the thing that we all want, no matter what our gender, race, religion, social status. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be connected. We want to be in community. We want to be respected. We want people to be kind to us. And sometimes we find that through baseball. I don't get that when I'm talking to Giants fans. But I do get it with Dodgers fans or overall baseball fans. And this is what I think that we really are seeking in terms of when we talk about empathy. This is what we're talking about. How do we find the places where we connect? How do we recognize that we all want these things, to be seen, to be heard, to be respected, to be loved, and to love others? And in issues of race, this country's been a mess for a long time. And we see that in films, we see it in books, we see it in our everyday lives. Somebody sent this to me from Coming to the Table. There's over on this table, there's little postcards that have the website for Coming to the Table. Feel free to take those on your way out. There's plenty there for everybody. But somebody sent me this quote, and it really struck me, it stuck with me, that the problem is that white people, we see racism as conscious hate, when racism is bigger than that. Racism is a complex system of social and political levers and pulleys set up generations ago to continue working on the behalf of white people at other people's expense, whether white people know it or like it or not. That one's kind of hard for me to take in. Racism is an insidious cultural disease. It's so insidious that it doesn't care if you're a white person who likes black people. It's still going to find a way to infect how you deal with people who don't look like you. Yes, racism looks like hate, but hate is just one manifestation. Privilege is another. Access is another. Ignorance is another. Apathy is another, and so on. So while I agree with people who say that no one is born racist, it remains a powerful system that we're immediately born into. It's like being born into air. You take it in as soon as you take your first breath. It's not a cold that you can get over. There's no anti-racist certification class. It's a set of socioeconomic traps and cultural values that are fired up every time we interact with the world. It's a thing you have to keep scooping out of the boat of your life to keep from drowning in it. I know it's hard work, but it's the price you pay for owning everything. From a guy named Scott Woods. And a very short quote from Toni Morrison. In this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate.
Oh. All right. You guys hear me okay? I wish I had a backstory of my colleague up here, but as ton of you probably already know, that you've seen me, because we've gotten to do a lot of things in the community, and the things that are open, most of you guys attend. So I'm glad to see you all back again. But one thing that was really unique in my mind about the way Sean just brought us up is I've been doing this kind of work for a while. It's nothing that I set out to do specifically. I remember when I was a very, very young man, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I don't know why. I think shows like LA Law and stuff like that made it look really cool. And then I got an Atari and all those cool things. So I was like, oh, I'm going to become a computer programmer. But then I learned how much math is involved in that. So I knew I couldn't do that. So I started to do little work because I like to talk to people. I was doing a lot of counseling type stuff. So I was a counselor at a learning center, and I worked at Northwood Health Systems with people with addictions. And what I always noticed at whatever job I went to, the idea of my race and me being able to give insight or to speak about it always worked itself into the job. So I kind of just took that in, and I was like, all right, that's fine. And I knew it was a part of me. So whatever job I took, I knew that was going to come with it. Now, if you fast forward the tape some more, I got an opportunity to work where I'm working now at the WWVA. And it was like all those outside interests and ideas that have been blended into my career would land in one spot where I could do these things and I could do it all at work. I wouldn't have to do anything after work to kind of satisfy that need because it would always be there. And I noticed when I began doing it more full time, there were times that I walked into the room and it was adversarial. There were times I walked into the room and I had to play peacekeeper to try to bring things together. I noticed that whenever I came in, though, I earmarked the difference in our community and in our area. And I spoke to it. I spoke how to correct it, how to change it, how to ease pain. And never until just now have I ever been introduced in a way that said, and this man represents Wheeling in its totality. Not necessarily, I'm the Wheeling representative guy, not necessarily the Black community spokesman, or when I worked at Wheeling Park High School, we always used to call me the Black people whisperer. Black people came and were upset in the school, like, where's Mr. Scott, getting down here immediately? And I want to talk to people who speak out there. So I appreciate that the opportunity to be introduced as one of us, one of you, I'm here representing you all in the room today, because that's not usually a luxury that I get very often, especially with the work that it is I do. Because oftentimes I have to shine lights on our area that don't necessarily expose the nicest things. But I think with our conversation today, we're going to see that light has shined some things that are very similar. Some things might stand out, seem or feel painful, but a lot of it is similar. And a lot of it are things that we can work to correct together. And that's always the thing that I'm pushing whenever I get to talk about this sort of stuff. And I know for a fact that I will continue to ramble like this forever. So I'm going to stop.
You know, I didn't know any of my family history connected to slavery growing up. My dad was born in Iowa, and his dad, my grandfather, died when my dad was 2. And so if he knew any stories, they were not passed along because my dad was 2. And his mom ended up remarrying and moved to the West Coast. My dad joined the Navy. He was in San Diego. My mom's best friend in high school got asked out on a date by a sailor, and her parents said, absolutely not. But if you go on a double date, we would allow that. So she said to my mom, would you go out on a date with a sailor so that I can go out on a date with this sailor? And so my mom agreed, and my mom and dad met on a blind date, and here I am. And but my dad didn't know any of this history of the DeWolf family. Didn't know that the most successful slave trader, he died the second richest man in this country when he passed away in 1837. And he owned, in the War of 1812, more ships than the United States Navy. And this family, it was something, you'll learn this in the film tonight. It's really quite a good movie if you're able to make it tonight. I'm really impressed. It came out in 2008, and it continues to get shown regularly in schools, churches, colleges around the country. Because it tells quite a powerful story. And, I got invited because a guy at a restaurant that I used to own where I live in Central Oregon, he came up the stairs one day as a fireman, and we'd become friends. He says, I think we might be related. My dad's middle name is DeWolf. And it turns out that his dad was this amazing genealogist. And when my wife and I got married, we went and visited his dad, stayed with his dad and mom. He was a retired Episcopal priest. And he told all these stories about this family, that we're related to the guy that wrote Moby Dick. And we're related to the guy that played Paul Drake on Perry Mason. Remember Perry Mason? Yeah, well, William DeWolf Hopper was the actor's name. And Drew Barrymore, her great aunt Ethel Barrymore, married into the DeWolf family and lived at the mansion that was built with the proceeds from 1 year's profits from the slave trade. And so I've written to Drew multiple times And I keep getting back autographed pictures. So I've got the greatest collection of Drew Barrymore autographed pictures, but no real conversation. But when Dave came up those steps and told me that his dad's middle name was DeWolf and his dad did this genealogy and telling us about all these famous people that were related to writers and ministers and the heads of the Episcopal Church, and then in passing and were related to slave traders, rum runners, and privateers, which sounded like something from Disneyland, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. I didn't really take it seriously until years later when Dave got invited to participate in this journey where we were going to retrace the triangle slave trade route of our ancestors from Rhode Island, where they lived, which is the largest slave trading state in this country. I didn't put you on the spot. I usually ask people, name the state. And everybody thinks Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Mississippi, Rhode Island. Responsible for more than half of all slave trading in this country, whaling and black people. And throughout the North, every one of the states in the North, I learned, had slavery. And I was completely oblivious to it. They didn't teach it in any history class, in any school that I grew up in. And so I was invited to participate in this journey with a bunch of people who are my seventh cousins, common ancestor born in 1695. And so, and finally, 30 years after deciding I wanted to become a writer in college, I actually became one and wrote about my experiences of this journey, and which was an experience in itself because I was doing things that were not on camera and being in spaces that are not on camera. And so the two are kind of bookends, the film and my book, Inheriting the Trade. But it's, as a white guy, I like black people. I'm a nice guy. I don't consider myself racist, but I am. I'm racist. It's in the air I breathe. It's in the water I drink. It's in everything that I grew up with without knowing it. And that's, I think, the insidious nature of racism is most white people, we're not aware. We're not aware of the advantages that I have being male, Christian, white-skinned, heterosexual, able-bodied, that people who don't have all those privileges, they don't get the benefits that I do.
Right. This is now. I feel like the point that you're starting on is one that I've geared a whole lot of the work that I've done towards, and particularly in this environment in the Valley, I've often had the thickest, softest kid gloves whenever that is ever brought up, because what usually gets thrown to me is I've worked for everything I've owned. What are you talking about, this privilege thing? And the idea that white privilege, in essence, isn't extra money on your check. It's not a designated parking place really close to the door. It isn't necessarily a tangible thing that you can feel, touch, wear, and show to people. It's like a fish in water. They don't necessarily think about them being in water. It's just what they were born in, and this is how they operate. So it's been very difficult to try to set up the scenario that lets you feel the privilege that you live in without all the guilt that suddenly rushes over you once it's acknowledged. Now, there are a lot of folks that say that guilt is necessary to move forward, to process, to feel the progress actually happen. I don't know, because I work in a capacity where I want people to understand, to talk back, have dialogue, conversation. And a lot of times folks will shut down. If the guilt stuff begins to feel too much, they will shut down and want to just, what else can we talk about? So I do. I recognize everything that it is you're saying, and it is refreshing to hear it. but I do know that most of the ears it falls on are beginning to turn it off now, because I don't necessarily want to stand in here and let you tell me how privileged I am when I saw the way my grandfather looked when he came home from work every day, and I saw the things that my grandmother had to sacrifice and do. So I don't want to hear how privileged I am. We aren't, and if I'm speaking for you out of turn, please correct me. We aren't telling you about your privilege to make you feel that. We are telling you about your privilege so you can better understand those who don't appreciate or get to feel any of that privilege. So you can better understand our struggle. Because when it comes to historical stories or connection to the Valley or just history in general, I don't have that. I don't have it. We don't have these stories that can run through our lineage that we can sit around and talk about and be happy and kick it. The closest we've got, the closest I have my particular family is my grandmother Ethel Stradwick's chocolate cake. It's good. Now, I mean, I'm not just saying that it's historically good. It's so good that James Brown himself ate a piece and told my grandmother how much he liked it. We all tell that story. We talk about it all the time. But when we learn that that comes from the fact that James Brown couldn't stay in a hotel. So there was a draw to pick what family got to let the artist at that time stay with them. And that artist happened to be James Brown, and that house happened to be my grandmother's, and she happened to be making that cake that day. Wow. And I used to think, man, it's amazing. My grandmother was this mover and shaker and was around. It wasn't that. It was that our stars and our heroes were also the same second-class citizens that we were. So the fact that my Aunt Brenda was super close to going on a date with Marvin Gaye doesn't mean that she's put herself in these special positions where she could be around him. It's just that they had to operate in the same circles that we had to operate, which is second-class citizenship. And when you live in it, you still live in it. You're still living. You still have good days and bad days, and you smile and all that great stuff. We're not just walking around talking about how rough it is for us to live this way. So we still have these great memories, but none of them are completely stripped from trauma. And that's sad when you start to look at it, because now that I've got adult children, I often want to talk about what Black culture might even be. And I have yet to find a version or avenue to express it that's completely devoid from trauma or a traumatic experience. And that's difficult, because you don't want to get to the point where you're like, well, this is what my experience in this country is, and this is what my experience in this country is going to be. So prepare my children for processing trauma, because that's all I've ever learned to do. It's a tough thing. But, yes,
you know, when you mentioned guilt, the very first weekend gathering for coming to the table, there were about 24 of us at Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And the Center for Justice and Peace Building at EMU was hosting this gathering to sort of launch this effort coming to the table. And one of the guys, one of the co-founders, the founders are descendants from Thomas Jefferson, Black and white. You know, they call themselves the Marthas and the Sallys, who were half sisters. Most people don't know that. The Sally Hemings and Martha Jefferson had the same dad. And so the Marthas and the Sallys, and then the Hairston family. There's a book you probably have at the library called The Hairstons, an American Family in Black and White by Henry Winsek. And he tells the story of the largest plantation-owning family in the Deep South, the Hairstons. And so these two families of people got together to create this idea of coming to the table, dealing with trauma resilience, understanding what trauma is and resilience to it, restorative justice principles, where our basic criminal justice system says something bad happened, who did it, and what do they deserve? And we punish people. And restorative justice is trying to help people move through who have caused harm and deal with everybody who's impacted. Because if my car gets broken into in my neighborhood, all my neighbors are on alert. They're all impacted by that theft in my car. It didn't happen to them, but they're impacted. The hurricanes that are happening right now, they don't care what you look like or what religion you are. The hurricane's just going to do its thing, and there'll be a lot of destruction. And one of the things that Will Hairston said that weekend is that guilt is the glue that holds racism together. Because you make me feel guilty, my walls go up. This isn't my fault. I never owned anybody. I treat people nice. And so the guilt ends up not really being very useful. If it's useful to get somebody in the room, great, then get over yourself. And recognize that what this is about is knowledge and understanding and building relationships. And so the coming to the table approach deals with understanding and acknowledging all of history, that's one, building connections within and across racial lines, authentic, accountable relationships, working towards healing by any means necessary. In your faith community, it may be music, it may be yoga, it may be meditation, whatever tools you have to heal, working on healing. And then the fourth pillar of the coming to the table approach is taking action to undo the damages and to heal from the ravages of the legacy of slavery and its aftermaths that continue to infect our nation and our world. But the guilt and the shame, I think the best advice I ever got in this is to take the emotion out of the words we use and educate ourselves. Understand, why is it that access to education, housing, jobs, healthcare, in virtually every social indicator that we measure, it's better to be me than it is to be Ron in this country, flat out. And Ron and I have certain privileges that the women in this room do not have. We have male privilege. We'll walk into a used car lot today, we're going to get a better deal than the women in this room are. That's fact. So there's all kinds of privilege, advantages that people have. I just happen to have all of them. I mean, not quite as much as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but other than that winning lottery ticket that I haven't gotten yet, I recognize it and I acknowledge it, and I try to deal with it in ways that the ways that I treat women is different than I used to treat women. I try to be more thoughtful. The way that I treat people of different ethnicities, whether it's black folks or people from South America or from the Middle East, that I try to approach it with empathy, with trying to learn and understand and try not to be a jerk, which I have been in my life. And it's not easy work. And I get reminded by my wife regularly when I fall short, and friends of mine within coming to the table in particular, that we hold each other accountable in this work. But it's coming along with that, there's stuff I have to put up with that hurts. There's stuff I've had to deal with that is no fun at all, being a man in this world. It's not easy for any of us. I'm not trying to put all this on the men. I'm really glad to see so many men in this room, though. I gotta tell you, it's often not the case. It's often a room full of women, and then they go and talk to their husbands and try and straighten them out. So really, really pleased to have so many men here today. But it's hard work, but this is the path to liberation.
Right. It's weird to make me think of, because I was thinking, the room we're going to be talking to today, and what could we, my goal every time, whether it's an event or some sort of a speaking engagement, it is how can I make it real for the people that I'm talking to? Because I don't know how many times I've been somewhere where someone was talking and there's a point during it that it turns into them speaking at me, and I'm just kind of like, okay, it's probably going to be done soon. And I'm just not engaged. I just don't. I always want to try to make something connect with the people that it is I'm talking to. And I thought with this particular audience, I was thinking that generationally, you have been kind of duped and become a victim in a way. Now, a lot of the people who are writing policy and deciding what was great, what in the past was this, and how fantastic things are, the good old days, they are using versions of your memories to project those things. So what I would love is if you, being members of the generation you're in, could make sure that these folks younger than you know it was faulted. There were things that we had to work on. There were things I witnessed that I didn't speak about. There were things that I was used to seeing that I knew weren't right, but I didn't change them. And I'm not saying you accept these things to indict yourself. It's to make sure that those folks pushing this agenda of making America great again, or making things so much better like they used to be, have an accurate picture of what they're trying to recreate. Because your opportunity to change what that definition was has passed, but now you can change the people that are attempting to rewrite what your history looked like. You're the voice that they act like is the only voice they'll listen to tell them it was that bad for them. No, it was bad for your uncles and your cousins, all that. Yes, I'm telling you, things weren't great, but it was that bad for them. I never saw them in public forums, and I was never taught by a Black person. I never had an experience where that Black person or that minority person walked away from it feeling validated or feeling more of a person. It's usually soaked in an apologetic theme of, I'm sorry that I'm here, but I have to be. These are the things that I think your generation can let these folks know they're not going to get away with. They're not going to get away with standing on this idea that everything in the past was so pristine and amazing, and this new age with its social media and all this stuff ruined everything. I mean, even if you really feel that way, that's great. But I'm sure there are pieces that you're saying, then it wasn't as rose-colored as these glasses are making it out to be. Because I think that is your way of contributing. If any of you are thinking right now, this huge problem, how can I contribute to fixing things now? I believe that's a major way that you can do that. And I hope that it's something that doesn't seem impossible to you, because it's completely possible. Just a conversation with those folks that look up to you and want to hear from you and want to talk about the past. Just that conversation with them is enough, truly.
You know, you remind me of my grandchildren. I have 10.
Wow.
And they range from 5 to my oldest grandson just turned 20 a couple of days ago. And the impact that a grandparent can have on a grandchild is astounding. My favorite quote is that one of the main reason that grandparents and grandchildren get along so well is that they have a common enemy. I don't tell that to my children. They don't appreciate that joke. But when I think about how I can talk to my grandkids, and they adore me. As they get older, not so much, but especially when they're really little, and the kind of impact that I can have with the stories that I tell. And I think about the stories that I've been told about history. I was born the year that Brown versus Board of Education became the law of the land. And I grew up learning about Brown v. Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, and how wonderful it was that we finally got rid of segregation in schools. What I did not know until fairly recently is that the result of Brown versus Board of Education is more than half of the black teachers in this country lost their jobs. The schools that black kids went to were shuttered. They were bused into white schools and had white teachers and didn't have role models that understood their issues, where they lived, where they came from, what they were dealing with. And I found that just astounding as I learned about that. And Jody and I wrote about that in the little book of racial healing. And another one, my dad benefited from the GI Bill. He served in the Navy, and the GI Bill was a wonderful thing. It allowed people who served our nation to get loans and money for houses, for jobs, for education, start businesses. I didn't know until recently that 98% of the money from the GI Bill went to white GIs, that blacks were just cut out. In the South, in particular, there were laws, black people need not apply, period. And so the result of that is that a lot of white folks moved out of the inner cities, created these wonderful suburbs with wonderful new schools. And how do we pay for our schools? Typically is property taxes. Where's all the value? In these suburbs that were built largely as a benefit of the GI Bill. And what's left behind, inner city, black and brown people, more crime. These are the stories that we tell ourselves. It's more crime and people that they just don't work hard enough. We've created systems that benefit certain people at the expense of other people, and that's a reality. And I try not to. I really do my best not to be emotional about that or get my hackles up or try to rationalize my own behavior, but just to try and understand, what is it that Ron went through? What is it that your grandmother went through, that James Brown went through, who is an astounding artist with huge impact? But what did he have to put up with? Did he have to put up with what Frank Sinatra put with? I tell you, Frank Sinatra did not put up with what James Brown put up with. Flat out. That's just a fact of our nation's history.
Again, if we get the vibe up here and you don't begin to feel like you're part of this conversation, pull us back out. But when you talk about that, to me, it makes me so aware of the layers of subconscious and sometimes conscious layers that are put on our psyche, because James Brown has to go through what he had to go through. He had to stay where he wasn't permitted to stay in a hotel, no performing. So all these things get layered onto. Even if James Brown understands that there's stuff I can't do, there's places I can't go, I gotta watch my mouth and my step in this country, or just to do my job or to be me, that always will transcend to those other people, to the point where we understand coming into any situation, there's a rule of things or a set of things I cannot and should not do. And that's why it always seems so amazing at times to me when I experience white people upset about not being able to do something. It almost makes me just stand back like, that's what it's like. That's what it's like when somebody says something and you're like, oh, how dare you? And that's not the way that that's supposed to go. I can't believe it. I'm like, look at that. Look at that. They're probably going to change that too. They're probably going to give them what it is they didn't. When we have almost been conditioned to believe we kind of should be happy to be in here. so let's not push our luck. Like the idea of sundown towns and places you shouldn't go. I remember someone getting so offended at the idea that I brought up a sundown town in my lifetime that they wanted to blame me. Like, why would you say that about Shady Side? Why would you say that about Cameron? How dare you? There are good people over there. I didn't make it up. We didn't all vote and say, you know what, we're not gonna go Shady Side. We're not going there, or Cameron. We didn't make these rules, but we definitely understand them. And we know how to operate and to play the game and to live, to live and survive and be able to contribute to our families, those sort of things. We understand that we have to do these things under this veil of allowances, things we can do, places we can go. But the idea of you living that way just seems so foreign, and I'm always taken back when I see people saying, you know, I had a buddy Kojak who on a routine basis talks stuff to the cops. And it's almost like a TV show for me. I just sit back and look at this guy. He is upset right now. He's like, you know you pulled me over? I was going like, what, 5 miles over? I can't go 5 miles over the speed limit. I'm like, this is amazing. He's talking to the police this way. And not because I'm just cowering whenever I see lights, oh my God, but I do know the real consequence of what could happen if I decide to get a little too lippy, a little too mouthy, move a little too fast. But Kojak doesn't even live that way. It's nothing that he even thinks about. And the strangest place I see that idea rear its head has to come with the discussions I have about the N-word. I'm always blown away that I will find myself engaged in a conversation where a white person is looking at me and saying, well, you guys do say it. So, I mean, why can't we if you do and we? And I'm like, that is it. The idea that there's a word you couldn't say is often just too much. That they can't, no, I'm sure I can say whatever it is that I need to say. Or I'm being told that I can't. It's just ludicrous. It's a ridiculous idea. And I often get to just sit back and say, that's what life is like for them. There's tons of times that, how dare you? Like I don't have a lot of those moments in my life where I'm, how dare you say that I can't? I'm usually like, oh, well, okay. I figured you were going to find out eventually that I was here, so goodbye, and good day. It's just, I think it's conditioning in a way. And there are other like subtle nuances that bleed through, like some people have a tough time realizing that there are Black folks who are very proud Appalachian people. You know, they don't necessarily see the connection. They almost think of it like, well, this is where we ended up, so we kind of like where we ended up, so we're just fine with it. But there are things just laid into our DNA from being born in this area, like work and work ethic. I think that's one of those things that it's just in us. Like my grandfather worked in a coal mine, which most of us have stories of somebody in a mine or a mill or something like that. But he worked in a coal mine, and I remember my grandparents had 20 children. It just kept bleeding on to more like 168 some great-grandchildren. There's a lot of us. And I can remember just when my granddad gets home from the mine, we're all just gathered around. We want to hear about what he did and all these things that happened. And the idea of work is a real thing that I think it's an Appalachian thing. Now, my father, who I love dearly, I recently lost it, it's going on a year now. He was not like my grandfather. My father was an artist, he was a poet, he was also a criminal, he sold drugs, he had a lot of time in prison, severe alcoholism, all those things. Now, I know for a fact, I am my father. I'm named after him, I'm Ron Scott Jr. I am my father. But what I make sure people understand about me is I come from my grandfather. So there's small things that I can do, like most folks have ever seen me do any of these talks or events or any of this stuff. I don't know if you've noticed or not, I always have this hat on. Okay? I have this hat, and I usually will try to wear a tie, because the idea of a uniform lends itself to work. My grandfather wouldn't necessarily understand the work that I do now. I go around, I talk to people, and do stuff. He wouldn't get that. But the uniform that I wear when I know I'm going to be talking attributes to the idea that I'm working, which lets me pay homage to my grandfather. But most folks that see me see my father. And that definition or image of me is so much easier to believe. No one thinks coal mining or any of that stuff when they see me. But if you told me I had been to prison a few times or I've done this and that, okay, I got it. So it's all that stuff combined. I mean, it's amazing when you try to put it all together to let other folks see or let other folks get a glimpse in. But I want to make sure that you guys all understand as an audience that these are things that link us as well. I mean, it feels like it's clear-cut delineations and we're not the same in all these ways, but I'm telling you, we are so connected that it's almost bizarre if you really sit and think about it.
You mentioned sundown towns. Wheeling, you got nothing on me. Oregon was a sundown state. When Oregon became a state in, 1848, I think, they had three things to vote on that ballot. First one is, do we want to join the United States of America, become a state? And it passed with 75% of the vote, which is just men. Sorry, ladies. And the second item was, are we going to be a slave state or a free state? And they voted to be a free state. Similar percentage, about 75%. The third item on the ballot, are we going to allow black people to live here? 85% no. No black people in the state constitution. And it wasn't taken out until the 1930s. And still today, where across the United States, the population, black population in the United States is somewhere around 12, 13%. Wheeling is what, 5%? 4%? Oregon, 1.9%. And that's grown from what it was. In 1948, there was a town called Vanport. It was between Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, right on the Columbia River on the Oregon side. Second largest city in the state of Oregon. It's where all the black people lived. They were brought in to work. They weren't allowed to live in Portland because white people lived there. So they created this city. It wasn't built particularly well. It's kind of run down, just not very high quality. But it became the second largest city in the state until a dike broke on the Columbia River and flooded it and literally washed the town away and displaced everybody who lived there. Fast forward a few years, the Albina neighborhood in Portland, which is where then all the black people were relegated, they lived, they were all displaced in order to build Interstate 5 from California up to the Canadian border, and to build the Rose Garden. Anybody hear of the Portland Trailblazers? That's where all the black people used to live, where they played ball now, where Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen play music. And Emmanuel Hospital, very famous hospital in Portland, big expansion, move out the black people. I mentioned earlier how I love the Dodgers, I love baseball. Dodger Stadium is built, Chavez Ravine displaced all the Mexican people in order to build Dodger Stadium. It's what white people have done in this country for a really long time. There's a book, you mentioned how well-connected we are, and if you don't have this book in this library, you gotta get it, it's amazing. And it's called A Brief History of Everyone Who Ever Lived. And it's a nonfiction story about human beings and how we are connected. And one of the factors is if you go back 600 years, as a white person, you're related to every other white person who has ever lived in the history of this planet. If you're of African descent and you go back 600 years, you're related to every African person who has ever lived. Asian, 600 years, you're related to every Asian person. Go back 1,200 years. We are all related to every individual who has ever lived in the history of this planet for hundreds of thousands of years. We can now prove that, this guy shows, with the combination of DNA and mathematics, something that we couldn't have done 30 years ago. So that relationship, that connection, my cousin, it's profound. And that doesn't mean we're going to get along. Anybody here have any issues with members of your family? Please. There's one of the reasons my wife and I live in Oregon is our families are in Southern California. Oh, no, Mom, if you're watching, I did not mean that. That was a lighthearted moment. I apologize. But that's the reality, is that we are all connected by DNA. I hear from white people all the time, I did my genealogy, I'm so excited I'm related to Charlemagne. Every white person's related to Charlemagne. The man had like 25 kids, and each of those kids had 25 kids, and they moved everywhere, and they had lots of kids, and we're all related to Charlemagne. So not that big a deal. But it's that connection that is so profound. And when I realize that, I can look out at people in this audience and realize we may disagree on politics, on religion, on you name the topic that we may not agree on. But we all want our kids to be happy and healthy and safe, don't we? Successful. We want our grandchildren to thrive. We want our friends to do well. We want to be happy and healthy. We want to be joyous, loving people. We all share that in common. And yet, we stick it to each other. I've done it to my sister. She's done it to me. Done it to my kids. They've done it to me. I'm sure you all have stories like that as well. And to our neighbors. Our brothers and sisters of a different religious background, a different racial makeup, whatever it may be. We don't always treat each other really well in this country. And that this empathy.
And I know you brought up Charlemagne and his connection with all the white people. I think those on here in the audience, but the one that's in here knows that in the Ohio Valley we have Reuben Stradwick. He's our Charlemagne. One in maybe every 3 black people are Reuben Stradwick's child. That is my uncle. One of the most prolific men to ever live in the area. And it's always made me think about that because we're like, oh, there's another Reuben Stradwick out there named Charlemagne. But I love to bring that when I get a chance to shout my family out. I just love to do it. My family here in the back. But my Uncle Reuben, you know him. Or someone in your family does.
I'm wondering if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts.
Question.
Yeah.
You always think when you hear racism that the white people own it. And I feel all nationalities are basically racist in their own way. Asian people have racism toward white people in some societies. Your interpretation.
The semantics, definitions. The best way that I've heard it described is everybody has bias. Everybody has discrimination tendencies towards things that, or people that we discriminate against. And, I'll see somebody standing on the entrance to a freeway with a sign asking for money, and they look like they're not, they may not have the best clothes, and in my mind, am I seeing myself connected to that person and inviting that person over for dinner? Probably not. That's my prejudice coming out. When the best definition I've heard of racism is that it's that bias or that discrimination combined with the power to do something about it. And as a white man, if I'm going to discriminate against Ron, I have the power because I'm white. And that's where the racism is, that when you hear that people talk about white people owning racism, there may be Asian people that discriminate against white people or brown people, what have you. But to call that racism, they don't have the power that I have. I've got a lot of power. That's the best that I've been able to understand the difference. And I don't really care that much. What I try not to do is get defensive about it, and I have plenty, believe me. But what I try to do is recognize whatever we call it, how can we have empathy? How can I understand whether it's a black person, a brown person, in our case, a woman, a child, in what ways am I living my life that may cause them unnecessary harm? So,
Question though, are you saying only the white people have racism?
white people have the power, white people have the money,
I'm aware of that, but I'm trying to
Yeah.
say, other ethnic groups also practice racism subtly. Racism is very subtle.
That's unconscious bias. That's fine.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that it's easy to call that bias, and if you want to call that racism, that's fine too. I really don't have a big issue with that. But I'm just expressing what I have learned, and people who study racism, it's the discrimination combined with the power to enforce it. And that's what white people have had in this country and in many countries around the world for many generations.
And just if I can add anything, I think separating, I like to put prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes, those sort of things. None of those things are specific to white people. Anyone can practice and dabble in all of those things. But what I wanna focus on, and not necessarily focus on, but what I love to talk about is the notion that sometimes gets stuck in folks' heads that if I'm a victim of said racism, prejudice, stereotype, or discrimination, that now I am now at a level more righteous and more pristine because of my victimhood. Now, that sounds ridiculous unless you go it backwards and think, if I'm practicing it, I must be inherently evil. Because I think that idea permeates people's heads too often, which makes folks say things like, they can be prejudiced too. We don't have a monopoly on evilness, foulness, vileness, because I don't want you to think we're ever saying that you do. By being the person who is caught up in the system of racism that spews it, collects its revenue, and then disseminates it all through the community again, it is not a moral accusation against you in particular. But when you begin to feel like it is, I think it's super easy to get draped off in the idea is, well, I'm not the only one out here doing it.
This is really so important, because one of the keys here is me as an individual. So often we look at racism as individual acts of discrimination, and far more important and far more insidious are the systems, like real estate, redlining, which is illegal, still takes place in some places around this country where we're not going to show black people houses in this particular neighborhood. I don't know about Wheeling, but I certainly know other areas of the country. And it's the systems that are in place, systems within the medical community, systems within education. You've heard of the school to prison pipeline? There are places where teachers will determine that that little black boy is going to be trouble. He's on his way to prison, and he's in kindergarten. It's unbelievable. I listened to a guy, so Coming to the Table is part of an organization called Our Joy, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, starting in California. And they began doing restorative justice circle processes within a school, reduced the dropout rate from about 80% to 6% with this work of seeing the humanity in these kids. And I heard one of the young men who was on staff at that time speak once. And the first time that he was arrested by the police was in nursery school. By the time he had been through first grade, he'd been arrested like 5 times, arrested by the police. By the time he got out of high school, by the 10th grade, he'd been arrested like 100 times. He'd been thrown out of a whole bunch of schools. Was he an angel? No, he was not. But you have a system that identified him in a particular way. And when you had a group of people from Our Joy who cared about him as a human being, brought him together with school counselors, administrators, teachers, family friends, family members, his colleagues, and they sat around in a big circle. Here's our problem with you. Here's what we love about you, and here's where we're frustrated with you. And they went around the circle, and this lasted all day long for this kid. And at the end of this big circle process, they all made agreements. He said, okay, I will do this. What's your mom and dad going to do? What's your teacher going to do? What's your principal going to do? How are we going to treat each other? It changed his whole life. And it changed the system in that school. And they're in a whole bunch of schools and are making a big difference by the way that we treat each other. And however we define it, however we call it, it's the systems where issues of racism really infect our society in so many ways. I hope that helps. Yes?
Well, Tom, building on that, as an audience member and someone who, I work here at the library, I know, how do I say this? When you talk about the system, it feels overwhelming because I can't change the system. It doesn't feel like I can.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of talking as an audience member, trying to get the discussion going. I don't feel like I can do that. And especially sometimes as a woman, I felt that. So what do I do as an audience member who's learning more about this? Say I'm part of another generation that isn't hearing. I know what I do. I read about things. I want to know more, I read. And I've been trying to build the library collection here so that if people are interested, they can come here and they can find those books. They can, and also the collections, because I want people to know about the history of wheeling. But what can we do after this program? Besides come to the program tonight, as individuals.
Thank you.
Please stop me before you go. This will be our last question, so I'm going to give each of you a chance to respond to what Laura said. It's a good place to end. What can we do? Go ahead. Sorry.
Your biggest challenge here is if today becomes a dot on your life's roadmap, someplace you visited once. The most important thing is think about this, think about what Ron and I have been talking about, read. You must be a librarian. Is that we spend time reading and learning and paying attention, because ultimately that's, I think, where our hope is, that we expend the energy to try and understand. So I got involved with Coming to the Table, and I'm like, oh my God, racism. It's been around since the Pilgrims first arrived in this country. And what can I do as one person? And I met a black woman named Sharon Morgan. I'm, kumbaya white guy from rural Oregon. She's hard as nails black woman from south side of Chicago. And we're both like, what can we do? And she and I went on a road trip together. And we drove through, I think we were in like 26 different states, and we went to Tobago in the Caribbean, to the last of the existing old plantation houses that hadn't been wiped out by a hurricane. And we experienced, we went to Money, Mississippi, where Money, Mississippi.
I know it.
Who was killed in Money, Mississippi? Emmett Till, thank you. God. Sometimes the old brain, you know. But we went to Lawrence, Kansas, and saw a Civil War. We went to places of horror and terror and places of hope. We went to museums. There were times when she wanted to put me out of the car. She was just so pissed at me. And how do I react to that? What we did together is just commit to being together and learning what we could from each other. She had no idea that I knew James Brown. Why would I listen to Little Richard? Why would I listen to Chuck? Hey, I've seen Little Richard in concert. I've seen Chuck Berry in concert. I love this music. I grew up in Southern California listening to Wolfman Jack out of Tijuana on the Ghetto Blaster radio stations and listening to all this beautiful, beautiful black music. She had no idea. I had no idea she was listening to the kind of white people that I would listen to. It's like you spend time, it's amazing how much we have in common when we talk about music or art or books or whatever it may be. And so that to me, it's in the relationships. It's in the communications. It's in making the kinds of connections that are authentic and accountable. I love talking about the Dodgers, but we can get caught up in sports at the expense of the kind of stuff that serves our humanity. And that's when Sharon and I finished this, we were in Tobago when we sent the first 3 chapters to our editor at Beacon Press. And she said, I normally wouldn't deal with this right away, but I know you're in Tobago, and I've edited these first 3 chapters. This is amazing, what you two are experiencing together. And that's my invitation to you all is get to know yourself, get to know each other, spend time with people that you've been raised and I've been raised to see as the other. And I'm not, honest to God, I'm not suggesting you go out and find your first black friend. That is just way too much pressure to put on black people. We white people have a lot of work to do on our own, and we're in the perfect location to do that at the library because there's a ton of good books here. And I'm sorry to ramble on so much. Go for it.
I feel like your versions were so much cooler than what mine are going to be. If I was thinking moving forward, I would. I'm telling you, it seems so based. There's a talk that I often give about cultural diversity and stuff, and I always talk about ways we can work on the misunderstandings. And one of them are things as subtle as on the coffee table that you have at your home, go out of your way to make sure there's like an Ebony magazine or a Jet magazine or something that looks like it's directly from a culture not your own. Put something on that coffee table that when people see it, your friends and family, they assume someone forgot it there. Mother's Day, Father's Day, imagine sliding them the card. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Big black lady on the front. Will it cause an issue? Will it be funny? Will no one even bring it up? Who knows? These small things, I think, get enough of a conversation going that you can find out the kind of people your family's made of, or you'll find out what the limits, the parameters, all those things. And I felt like you have to make sure you, and this isn't an issue with you guys, it's more me, Glenn, Rosemary, we'll work on this for you, but make sure you find yourself at events, activities that have nothing to do with your culture. Like over the weekend, we had the Ohio Valley Festival for Filmmakers of Color. There are people who wouldn't come to that because it says filmmakers of color. Like, why would I go to that? I wouldn't go to that at all. It's not for me, obviously. But you won't be able to keep people like me out of Italian festivals, the Lebanese festival, because I don't believe it's for them. I believe it's my way to see into their culture and experience what they're doing. We need you to think of that the same way. So if you do bring back events like the African American Jubilee or anything like that, find yourself there because you want to be there. Just your presence alone it's such an olive branch to know that you're there to see what we do and learn about us in that way. And it doesn't just have to be Black stuff. The Pride Festival, find yourself around people that you aren't normally around to learn them. And what you'll find out is the amazing similarities that exist. So get you some magazines, get a couple of baby dolls that might look Hispanic or Asian, pass them out to your younger family members. Make sure that this is something that the diversity that they bump into that they don't even realize it half the time, because it will cause conversations, it might cause some uncomfortabilities, but it will just start putting the bug in people's ears that there's a world out there that's completely different from them, and they'll experience it, they'll see it, and you'll lead the way because it's your coffee table that they're seeing Black people weekly laid out in front of them, and they'll wonder and that's when the conversation starts. Those are the things that I think you can do. I don't know. I mean, I love the idea of deciding you're going to get a Black friend today. And please tell them that I sent you to. Hey, Ron, stop saying
Ron sent you.
I would absolutely love that. Ron Scott told me I needed a Black friend today. And
And approach it with humor.
One thing out.
Yeah.
It goes way back. It's in different cultures. It's how you raise. You're not born racist. It's how you raise. And some people, they were just raised that way to think, well, they're different and I don't want you around anymore. Like you said about Asians, Black, Filipinos, and how they're becoming racist is because how they were treated. Let's take the Native American Indians. You know, they were wild people and we're going to just kill them all off, which they tried. But then they don't like the white man because the white man treated them wrong, but they got along better with Blacks because of the way that Blacks were being treated. So I think it's just how you were raised, where you're raised. I wasn't raised. You would know, you're younger than me. His grandpa and my dad were brothers. And we grew up in Center Willing, right down here in Center Willing, and we played with the same white kids because we were all poor. You know, we all had something in common. We were not taught that just because they're Black, we ain't all we ain't none of us got nothing. So we hung together. We had what they call the color playground, which is by the junkyard. But then our little white friends said, well, how come you don't come to the 26th Street playground? Because we were told we weren't allowed. They said, well, come, you're our friends, come. Come play with us, come swim with us. So we went, well, of course, we got a little backlash, so we came back again. They said, they're our friends, we want them in here. But I think that's what it is how you're raised and where you're raised and how your parents was raised and how their parents was raised. But each one has to learn, and always say it's going to be our younger generation, my grandkids, who are they're only a quarter Black. My kids are half Black. So I think it's going to be them to come along and say, look, grandma, grandpa, uncle, Black, white, whatever. You know, times have changed. You know, we're all mixed now, like you said, we're all related. I don't even know what, look at me and look at Ron, and we're related. I don't know what all's in me. I heard that there's some Stradwicks that started out white, which probably was. I got this little brochure with this little white name that says Stradwick, and I'm like, oh, where they come from? But I just think it's how you're raised, where you're raised, and those people are the ones that need to come together and say times have changed, and it's time for us to move on and forget about the past. I hate people say, well, I didn't do it, I knew it was slavery, but I know you didn't do it. But some of the stuff just keeps going on and on and on, that some people keep talking about, instead of saying, okay, that was in the past, times have changed. I know there's still a lot of ways to go. And like he said, you just have to sit down and talk about it.
You know, and I think one of the biggest challenges is, for me, I tend to take things personally. And if people disagree with me, and I get my hackles up, and I try to approach this work not that way. I try to approach it with a sense of hope, a sense of dignity, a sense of humor, and really a sense of wonder. I wonder what I don't know. I wonder what life is like for that other person. I wonder, and come to it with wonder and imagination. We can change the world. I mean, we have changed the world, and we can continue. I mean, I think of what life was like in the Middle Ages. Oh my gosh, people were horrid. The metal contraptions they would put on somebody's face who didn't believe the right way, you know, in a religion. Torture. We're not doing that. I just, as hard as things are in our country and in our world right now, I still have a little bit of hope. And I see the smiles on a lot of people's faces in this room, and that gives me some hope.
Hope is a good place to end.
I know we got this schedule thing.
It's my job to stop it when it's time to stop. But it was great. How about a hand for Thomas?